begin. We're starting the recording now. The topic for today is finished goods inventory for beginners. And Joe, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter.
Okay, Tony, and I'm assuming everybody can see my screen now.
Yes, we can see it and we can hear you plainly. So take it away.
All right, good. Okay, the first thing I want to start with is that we do have a manual. So if you go to the folder down here, I've got a manual called ASI manual. Some of yours will be called GUI manual, but you could relabel that to ASI for our company. And then you can go into the finished goods file, and we'll have an option there called tips, which will have a variety of questions that may have come through the years. But the main manual is actually called manual, the folder manual, and then you would go into finished goods. We are actually currently modifying all of our documentation. Order processing will be the first one that you'll see. So there is a manual out there. The next thing I want to point out is when you go to any file, the question mark right here also gives you help on that particular screen. If you're on a specific field, you can press F3 and you'll get help on that field. So that's going directly to our database, typically on our server. So it's updated constantly. I'm going to go through most of, generally what you're going to do for inventory, including the warehouse transactions, but I'm going to start with the actual finished goods master file. And I'm going to start with some of these icons. Once you have all your inventory in here, this first icon is a utility that'll let you mass update a lot of fields. And you can download and upload to make that rather quickly, rather than constantly going to each item, clicking the update, saving it. So it's a faster way of doing a mass update. The Excel icon lets you output any number of records by the sort criteria or ranges here, and then you can pick whatever fields you want. These are all the fields on the left, and then you add them and you move them to the right, and then you can move them up or down, and then you output to Excel. This little column manipulator here lets you rearrange fields. So if I wanted to put the name in front of the description or vice versa, I can rearrange columns. I can shrink columns, expand columns. That is saved by user ID. So each user can actually have this display look however they want. As you can see, I've started the item number, the customer part number, customer estimate number. But you can change that however you want. If you want the customer's part number to be first, second, you can change all that. Now you'll also notice right here I'm seeing a number of records on my screen, and then I can scan down. How many records are displayed here is an NK1 parameter that we call FG browse. And if I minimize this a second, I'm just going to go there and I'll just show you that. You'll see a whole bunch of NK1 parameters that start with the letters FG. And you can see browse is the first one. And you can see I'm indicating that I'm going to show 99 records at a time. You can show more or you can show less. And basically what that's going to do is simply display how many records are on the screen. And then you can say show all, or you can say show next. If you said I want to see 15 or 20 at a time, then you would say show next, or you could say show all. Obviously, if you want to add a brand new item, you would click the plus sign. It's the same thing as going to this view item and clicking the add button or copy button. One thing that I want to note is when you click the plus sign, there's a lot of default records here, fields, I should say. That default comes from an NK1 parameter, and that NK1 parameter is called FG master. It's called FG master. So go down a little bit further. And you actually indicate a specific item code that you want to be your master, and then that'll be all of the standards that you want. So if you want the category, for instance, to be bags or boxes, you can have a default category, a custom or stock or whatever it may be, but you can have defaults. So if you ever wonder, how does it default certain information? It comes from that NK1 FG Master character value field. This little book icon, and you'll see a little star. When you see a star, that means there's notes behind that. This book icon is what we call spec notes or specification. And it could be something just a default. We have programming logic for this customer service note. And what that's an NK1 that says, do you want to keep track of customer service notes? And anytime there's a quote added, a price change on an order, an invoice, it basically tracks everything about pricing automatically, and it builds that spec note automatically. Spec notes are under NZ number 5, spec material codes. Oops, I'm sorry, wrong one. Right here, number 6. So you can add any kind of a spec note that you want, and then you can have specific groups of notes by what we call specification codes. You can see here as an example, we created a spec code CC, which is automatically printing on this person's job ticket. Same thing as down here. We created a spec code called PRT. So that's a way to make specific spec groupings print on certain job tickets. But it could just be, generic in the notes that you just want to click and have somebody view either out on the plant, on the job, or in customer service. But that's user definable. We do have some logic for a lot of those spec codes, which we can program to specific business forms like the job ticket or a bill of lading or a purchase order. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. Going along here, this is just another way to drill over to another part of the system. Some people will call this a favorites menu, and the favorites could be even a utility. It doesn't have to be another menu, but utilities are typically hidden from the users. And like as an example, I know we have a utility that can automatically set inventory items to active or inactive. And the importance of that is when you run a report, you can say, I only want active items. And so now the report, instead of going through tens of thousands of items, may only have to go through a few hundred items to get the data. And so that's a utility to set items to inactive. And it'll basically, this little flag right here would be checked. And then that item would be ignored on that report. That's a very valuable option for the NF10 utility, which does a recalc and resets all your inventory balances. So under NF10, risk recalc, you can see you can include or exclude inactive items. So again, setting items to inactive can really speed up the processing time. Just moving along here, well, that's a drop down or a favorites menu, and each user ID can have their own favorites menu. Then we have a little calculator which shows you decimal equivalents, and then we have a paper clip at the top, and again you see an asterisk. A paper clip is basically an attachment, whereas the spec notes are typewritten. They're just typed in, or the system automatically does the typing for you if we have done some pre-programming. But this is attachment. So any file in the system, you can attach a file. In this case, I think I've got a Word document. Oops, not pointing to the right directory, but it could be a Word document, Excel document, and so forth. The paper clip, we also have a unique, let me go to another item. I'm going to search here. Now, when I'm going to these fields here, these are search fields. And so I can search for a specific item. I could also press F1 and then have multiple ranges, multiple ways to find that item code, in this case by name, description, estimate, style, category, which are the same ones on the top, but that's when you're within the F1 search. So I'm going to go to that item, and now I'm going to go to the image, And now you notice I've got a button down here called graphics. So I could have an attachment, and typically this is an attachment that may print on some of our job tickets, but that's under the image file. Okay, the POs just tells you what POs are open for this item. I'm going to go back to the browser and just show you a couple little tricks. I'm going to just show all again here. And we have wildcard searches within these search fields. So if I was to say something like Apple, an asterisk, oops, I did something wrong here. Oop, there it goes. So now you can see the word Apple. It doesn't have to be at the beginning of the description. It can be anywhere embedded, and it finds that record. So the asterisk, whereas if I was to just say Apple here, it's only going to find the ones that start with Apple. But when I put an asterisk or make it a wildcard search, it's a different look. I'm just going to show everything again. Now the search fields at the top can be multiple criteria. So if I want all the items for customer IBM, okay, I didn't type something right, but anyhow. So now I've got all the customers for IBM, but if I also wanted a certain style or category, maybe I just want boxes. Okay, now it's just boxes for IBM, and I could continue to search if I just wanted certain styles. I could then, further limit that search. So it's a multi-tier search, and you can see I'm only doing active client or active items. I'm going to get out and go back in here. I'm going to save the columns that I've changed. I'm going to go back to the file maintenance of inventory, and I'm going to go to 10 by 10 by 10, and I'm going to go through the details of some of these items. Some of it is pretty explanatory, but I'm going to click the update button. Now you have a finished good item number, and that item number, how that is created, is an NK1 parameter. It's called FG. If I go out here, FG item number, I believe. It looks like I must have got out of the NK1 parameters. I'm going to go back into those. So if I go FG, and I know it's item, it's right here, and there's a variety of ways of how you can have that default. Some people just have it default to the customer part number, which is right here, but one of the options that I like is it defaults to the first letter of the category, so it might be a letter B in this case, and then it's got the customer's code, which this isn't a great example. Let me go to like an IBM or let's say a B. You can see here, these are all Abbott Laboratories now. So you can see the first letter is for B for boxes, then it's the customer code right here. The next 6 letters are 8. And then this happens to be a set. First of all, it says the next 5 characters or numbers, I should say, digits. It's the first item we did for Abbott Laboratories. A indicates revision A, but the 00 indicates that it is a set. And then all the components of that set would have the same preceding numbers, but it would end with 01, 02, 03, 04. So it doesn't matter what your customer calls it. You can have a very organized part numbering system by using that NK1 FG item code. I'm going to go back to the 10 by 10 by 10 and go back to the View Item tab. Now, clearly, if it's a manufactured box, you're going to have an estimate. And then all this information here is going to import from your estimate. If it's an item that you're buying and reselling, you can type this information in. Obviously not the estimate number, but the other information you could just type in. Or you could provide a lookup to find, the styles that you have out there. We also have a prep and die file, which would link to these items. And then there's a lot of detail about the die, who owns it, what's the item number on it, what's the general ledger account number associated with it. So our prep and die file has far more information about these codes here. Of course, you've got at the very top just the description of the information, and you can see really the item name is the first description, but we have a lot of different searches on that, and then you have 3 extra description fields. If I was to change something here, I'm just going to add a period, and then when I click save, okay, got to tell me I got an invalid customer code. But when I click save, there's a pop-up here. And this is the best way to update information so that your estimate and your order and your finished good item is in sync. If you want the descriptions and part numbers to all be the same, update the information in the finished goods file, and then this will say, do you want to update the order and what fields do you want to update? And do you want to update the estimate and what fields do you want to update on the estimate? And then that will keep them in sync. There is an NK1 in order entry called OEFG UPD, and you can, it's the other way. It goes from the order entry to the finished goods file, and you indicate what fields that you want in the order to be transferred to the finished goods file. The only reason we have that is sometimes people will have a stock item and they want to change the description on the order to make sure that that goes to the invoice, but they want the item to remain the same description information for the next customer and the next customer. So if you want this to stay the same, then you would change those settings for that NK1 parameter called OEFG update. But this is the best way to keep things in sync. Update the information here and it moves to the estimate and to the order. Now again, I mentioned the active inactive. The customer code clearly provides the ability to have customer inventory reporting. And it does by job, by warehouse, but this is the first key. Active items, again, you can have inventory reports and utilities trigger off of active versus inactive. Then, of course, is the item purchased or is it manufactured? In this case, it could be either, but you can see I got an estimate, so normally it would be manufactured. And then this is a stock item or is this a custom item? So these are just flags which lead to different reporting to pre-sort those reports. So if you only wanted purchase items, you would select that and it would trigger off of this field. The selling price, again, we have a price matrix. Typically the selling price may come from the quote, but for stock items, for people that sell packaging supplies, it will either come from the inventory table, but the first priority is the order price matrix, which is in order entry file maintenance. I'm just going to minimize this a second and show you. So if I go over here we have a price matrix by item too. So that's the first priority. And then the second priority for stock, I should not say stock items, for purchased items that are sold as distribution items. The second priority would be the sell price. We also have an option, while I'm mentioning that if you were to make something, let's say in this case a 10 by 10 by 10, where you're going to manufacture it and put it in inventory and stock it, and then that could be sold to many different clients. You could actually create a quote for this 10 by 10 for specific clients. And if you wanted the pricing to come from the quote file, there is an NK1 for that as well. I think it's it's under NK1 OE price check. And if that's set to yes, it's going to first look at the quote file for pricing. And if that's not built, then it's going to go to price matrix and lastly come to the sell price. The category, I'm going to explain categories a little more in detail when I get to that file, but obviously that's a sales category. Is it boxes? Is it bags? Is it sets? Is it displays? Is it partitions? Could be, a variety of different naming conventions that you've chosen. You can pick whatever you want here. As far as the warehouse and the bin location, this is just the default. So when you add a receipt, it's going to transfer from here. The count, normally this is going to come from your estimate, but if it's a distribution item, you're going to put in your default unitization count and then how many units. Now, a unit could be a case, a unit could be a bundle, or a unit could be the entire pallet if it's a flat pack. And so we make that a universal term, the word unit. So then we're saying units per pallet. In this case, since I'm just packing it by the pallet, I'm saying 500 per one, but I could have said I'm bundling these 25 per bundle and I'm putting 40 per pallet. So you can do it either way. I'm just going to cancel that and let it go reset. A couple other things here. You'll see pounds per 100. This is automatically calculated from the estimate based on the weight of the board. And we know the square inch formula from the style file to calculate the square inches. In fact, it's right here on the total screen. We know the box length, width, depth, and we know the total square inches, and we know the total square feet, and it automatically uses that to calculate your weight per 100 items, or per 100 boxes in this case. Now, if you have actually done weighed a pallet, and you say, or weighed 100 items in this case, and you said, I know that's 75 pounds, you could actually check this box right here, and we will no longer calculate. It'll use the weight that you said do not change. That little toggle box there says, this is 75 pounds for every 100 of these, don't change it. Now, some of these other fields here, obviously, how are you selling it and a unit of measure? What's your currency? Because we do foreign currency, but this is the currency that this item is sold in by default. We have some other items that are user definable. We have an inventory class, a cycle count code, and a production code. And then we also have a freight class. I'm just going to show you how those things get created by you. Now, you notice if I press F1, I've got a list here, but this may not be on your system. That's because you have to create these. And the way you create these is, number one, if I go to inventory file maintenance, I'm going to go to freight class. And freight classes can automatically print on your bill of lading form. So, and you can have different forms for different items and different customers for that matter. But this is where your freight class comes from. And then it's a little unique scenario for the other items. We have got these change user groups. User groups are typically used for security, but as you can see, we've used them for the finished good class, the cycle count code, and the production code. So what you do here is you go to the view items, and you'll see here I'm just saying A, comma, B, and that's what's going to be on my lookup. Same thing is true for the cycle count, where I said this, I'm either going to count this daily, weekly, monthly, but you can create any kind of a code you want here. Same thing for a production code. I just said it's new, rework, QC, hold. So you can create these production codes by changing the user groups, but they have to be exactly those groups. Okay, I'm going to go back into the file here, and just going down, this packing note here can print on your load tags. So I know one client that's actually printing the word red or blue or yellow. Let's say they were printing pie boxes and they want the red label to print. When they go to print the load tag, if it says yellow, the guy knows to load the yellow labels, or red, he knows to load the red labels. So that's one thing that we can use that field for. But it's really user definable. The costing here is automatically calculated by the estimate. And so it takes your out-of-pocket costs for material, which is all your board, ink, glue, and so forth, and it calculates that on a per thousand basis. And then it has the labor, which is your machine operations, and it breaks that down between your direct labor, man-hour rate, your variable overhead, and fixed overhead, giving you a total standard cost, which this is a little out of whack right now, and I could calc the cost here. The full cost is something we did for distributors, and they want to mark up the cost of an item that they're buying for maybe handling charges or freight or whatever it may be. So they may buy this for $1 each or $100. In fact, the cost per unit measure is each right now. I've been messing around with this today. But if my cost was, if I was selling it for $1.30 and my cost from my purchase order was $1, I might want to add, 10 cents for some miscellaneous cost. And that's what would transfer to your order. So if this is filled in, it transfers to your order. If that's blank, it is not filled in. I'm just curious if I say recalc cost here, and typically when you're going to modify a cost, you have to put a password in, and that's another NK1 parameter. And I'm just going to recalculate this one and see what it does. And so it recalculated based on what's actually in inventory. So that's what the recalc does. And this is just going to print a what we call a spec card, which is a custom form pretty much. And that's what this spec card will do. I'm going to go to the next tab. The inventory tab really it's dynamic in that it can handle multiple warehouses and multiple reorder points. Now you notice this on hand, on order, allocated. On hand is physically what's on hand. If you click the button, it tells you where it is located. That's no different than clicking the bin jobs tab, okay? So that button in the bin jobs tab is pretty much the same. The jobs PO on order, that's replenishing your, so this 16,000 will eventually go to on hand. But first of all, it's going to show you what jobs you have on order. So if I scroll over, you can see I've got 15,000 order for a job. When I exit, it's then going to show me what purchase orders, and I actually have both a job and a purchase order, and I've got another 6,000. Now, that doesn't say how many I've received, but basically the net result is what's been ordered versus received, and this is your net. This is what's on hand, I should say on order still. Allocated is from orders, okay? So if I click that button, it's telling me I've got an order 1863 and I've got 1,000 on order. And the way the math works is on hand plus on order less allocated equals available. When available is below 25,000, if this is a reorder point level, our reorder advice report, let me see, I'll just minimize this. Our reorder advice report, IR1, is going to show you all the exceptions of the items that are below the reorder point. So you can, and if you wanted to do it by warehouse, you would say reorder by warehouse. Now, what does that mean? And you can see all these different ranges, including a 6-month history. The other thing I want to point out is this is our standard report. Some of our reports have a user-defined report writer embedded, as this one does, where I can pick the fields that I want, and I can pick the orders, the order sequence of that field. That's by user ID. So if I go ahead and execute this report, it's going to save all these parameters, including the customer range, warehouse range, and everything else, how I wanted it sorted. And it's only going to save it by user ID. But again, that's an NK1, and it's called reports. So if you want to use the report writer, you would then go to that specific report. All the reports have this option. So if I was to go to IR down here, you can see IR1 does not have the report writer option. I've got it turned off, but all the other ones do. That's how you turn it on or off to get the report writer option. But that reorder advice report is trigger off for this. Now, when I say it's multi-warehouses, in this example, this is showing me all the warehouses. If I click this down arrow, I can say what's in Maine. And then if I click it again, I can say, well, what's in Texas? And you can see I've got 500 in Texas. And I've got a different reorder level here. So the point is, if you have a warehouse in Texas and you have a warehouse in Pennsylvania, it doesn't do you any good to have the inventory on hand in Pennsylvania when you're shipping from Texas. So you need to print a reorder advice report by warehouse, and that's what that reorder advice report does, but it works off of this table. And the key to that is the allocated to orders. Obviously, when you receive it, it goes to whatever warehouse you receive it to. When you're creating a job or a purchase order, it's also triggered as to where it's being delivered, whether it be to your house or to the Texas location in this case. Allocated has to do with the ship from location in the order, which comes from the customer file. So if you have multiple warehouses, we can explain that more later. But basically, it's pretty dynamic, and it's a multi-level inventory system, including reorder level points. If you're just going to buy and make, buy and ship or make and ship, then obviously that would just be a lot controlled scenario, and you wouldn't use these fields. But something that you're going to keep on hand for a just-in-time scenario, you'd want to use these inventory categories. At the very top, obviously, it's as similar as the previous screen, purchased or manufactured. But then we also have assembled, unassembled, and assembled with parts. And this all has to do with sets. So if you were making a set, if you were shipping, let's just say it was a partition, a length and a width partition that was assembled together. If you were shipping the components, the length partitions one day and the width the next, you could ship them unassembled. That means you're going to inventory them by the component. What assembled is you're going to reproduce the lengths and you're going to produce the width, but when you assemble them, it subtracts or reduces the components and then shows you only how many assembled sets you have. The assembled operation is you're actually doing inventory control for each component, and then you're receiving the set. This button here simply saves data entry. What that means is if you receive let's just say we had a length partition with 2 slots in it and a width partition with 1 slot, what it would say is when you assembled 1,000 sets, it would automatically receive 2,000 of the one partition and 1,000 of the other. So and then it also subtracts those components. So it does the in and out automatically, so you don't have to do any data entry. But the best inventory control is either assembled or unassembled. Now, if I wanted to recalc my inventories, if these things got out of whack, and that can get out of whack in a lot of scenarios. Specifically, if you don't, if you let our system go into a negative, which is an NK1 parameter when you post bill of ladings, you can receive into one warehouse and ship from another warehouse, and the system's going to be negative. And then if you were to delete the negatives, you'd have a messed up inventory. I've also seen people where they'll do a cycle count in the morning, and they have transactions that they haven't posted. Then when they post those transactions later in the day, their inventory's off because they didn't do things in chronological order. The recalc button will put things in the chronological order and recalculate all these buckets. And then, of course, if you have to override a field, you can always click the override button. Like the total CP field or tab basically brings in all the information from your estimate. But what this also has is the ability to have a unique customer part number and even a unique sales rep for this standard box. This will end up on the order and the invoice, a unique customer part number. We can also have a unique sales rep. If you have a national sales rep who's maybe always getting commission on this particular item, no matter where it's sold in the country, you can have that defined. And we can also have a unique case label. And if you scroll over, a unique pallet tag or load tag for this item. And this is the highest priority for labeling and load tags. Like I said, the bin location just shows you where everything is, what's on hand. This comes in from your estimate, the colors. The then cost is if you're buying something and directly on a purchase order, it's much like your raw materials where you'll have the vendor and you'll have the pricing that you buy this at for each vendor. The history tab is all your ins and outs. And you'll notice it's defaulting to a certain date. That's another NK1 parameter. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's got the FG date in it. And if I wanted to see everything, I might backdate that. And now you can see all the history. This history tab, you'll notice I also have a delete, copy, update, compress. A normal user will not see these buttons, but you can give security to an administrator, or if you log in as ASI. And this gives you the ability to kind of manipulate the history file or the master record. So rather than doing a cycle count or just doing adjustments, you could actually come right here to the master file, create the update, and then click your recalc quantities and you're done. But you need security rights to get these buttons on. And again, I've already explained the image, which you could have a graphic image attached to this item. And then lastly, this just shows you all the open POs, which is much similar to this. So that's just an anatomy of the item record. And now I just want to kind of go through some of the transactions that you'll do. So first of all, update transactions. You create receipts, you can just go to IU1. If you have Sharpshooter, it's going to basically build all these records from Sharpshooter. Also, if you create pallet load tags, there's an option for the pallet load tag to automatically create the receipt record. But I also want to show you another little trick. I've actually created a purchase order, and I'm going to go show this to you. It's for a drop shipment. So I'm actually going to buy these 10 by 10 by 10s and these 6 by 6 by 6s. But what you'll notice is it's drop shipped. It knows on the order on the purchase order, it knows what customer order placed that order. So there's a link between this purchase order and the customer order. And of course, the customer order has a release tab, which has the ship to information. So if I go over and I just simply click the receipt and I say add, and I type the PO number in, this is another prompt if you want to automatically bring everything in. And I'm going to say yes. And then you'll see this prompt. And it says, okay. Oops, I should have clicked that. My bad. I'm going to do this again. If I don't want to create the invoice, that's what I would do. But let's go ahead and create the invoice. So I'm going to click yes and yes. Say okay. And then I'm going to click here. And this just says, do I want to create an invoice? I'm going to say yes. Do you want to invoice freight? Yes, I do. And I know the freight amount was $50. And do you want to create an email for the bill of lading? I can say yes or no there. So I'm going to say yes to all that. Now, when I post this invoice, this receipt, it's going to automatically create my invoice. So what that's going to do in the background, and it's just showing me the 10 by 10, and by the way, this is outputting the notepad. That's an NK1 option, which you can do by user ID. You don't want to file print via this notepad, but it's a nice way to see things, sort things. And we also can do debits and credits to work and process and finish goods. And of course, you have all kinds of print posting ranges here. But I'm going to say yes. And that will automatically, in the background, basically release the order, create the bill of lading, post the bill of lading, and create the invoice. And if I did everything right, it should be sitting out here in the invoicing program. And there it is. So it eliminates all those steps. And that's an NK1 parameter for finished goods receipts for drop shipment purchase orders. It can save you a lot of time if you do a lot of that. Now, the other transactions are very similar, whether you're transferring adjustments. You can always get an edit list and you can always post. But basically, if you're going to move an item from one location to the other, it's just going to say, what are you moving? What's the warehouse? Where are you moving it to? And then every time you do any kind of a transaction, you're going to post it. I just want to mention this. In our Sharpshooter program, you can do these same transactions by barcoding, but we do have parameters so that, as an example, if you scan the load, if you're doing a finished good receipt and you scan the load tag, then you scan the bin location, it'll automatically post. Or it'll sit there and you have to manually post it. These are all NK1's parameters as to how you want to use our system. So those are the inventory transactions. One thing I want to show you on cycle counts, of course you have a report you can print which shows you everything that's in inventory. But when I do a cycle count, I'm just going to click, I'm going to pick the same item. A little trick some people don't know is if you go over to the tag number and press F1, you can actually pull in in this case, I'm using pallet tags. I could pick certain ones, I could use my control key, or I could pick them all by using my shift key. or, that's not all of them, obviously. If I wanted to select them all, I'd say select all, and now it's selected them all. And then when I import them, let's say I was using a system, I've been playing around, I just wasn't using inventory properly, I'm a new customer, and I know these have all been shipped. I could still say select all, and then I could say import on hand equals 0. It brings them all in and it zeroes them all out, and then I can post them, and I've just done a cycle count for every single item. So that's an option when you press F1 on the tag number. So that's a nice little count. Then, of course, you post it. Now, something other people that I've seen do that have our barcoding system, they'll actually zero out all the inventory, and then they'll use the sharpshooter and they'll just scan all the tags that are on hand. They post that, and that's what's on hand, what they've physically scanned. Sometimes that may be difficult if you're burying pallets behind each other. But if you have a nice racking system, that's an option. And the only thing I want to kind of end with, I do want to show a few of the product file maintenance. The categories, as I noted, you can have unlimited categories, and then within each category, you can actually define your expense accounts. This is a little unique change we did here, this board expense. And the reason it's there is if you were using, as an example, let's just say 200C craft paper, in the raw materials file, when you place the purchase order for it, it brings in an expense account. But if you wanted a different expense account for different products, for instance, maybe you wanted a different expense account for stock boxes versus custom boxes versus partitions, you can have a different expense account for that same 200C product by putting the raw material expense here in the product category file. But by and large, the product category file are your sales accounts. So you're going to be putting in your sales account right here, and that's what's going to go to your general ledger. If you do not put a GL account here, it's going to just become your default account in the receivables file, which is back here in the control file. So it's best to have unique sales accounts by product category. Otherwise, it's going to just dump everything into one sales account. As far as one of the first things you do when you get the system is you're going to create your warehouses, and then each warehouse, typically people just call the main one, our system defaults to main, and then you can just change the description of it. But you're going to have to create bin locations in the bin file here. So you can see I've got work in process floor and then a couple racks. But you also have to do the same thing for your raw materials and then your work in process inventory. So that's under the warehouse location. The set tab basically is automatically created from estimating. However, if there's something that you're going to just buy out completely and then assemble yourself, you would have to build this yourself. But this is basically all set, and then if you clicked on any one of these, it shows you all the components. So, and then it shows you what's on hand, and it shows you the quantity for each one of these. And you can see I can get creative here. I just made this one up myself. Two dice, 20 bingo chips in a box. But obviously that's not really what a Monopoly box is, but that's what I did. Or you can have something that's more standard, like an RSC, a length and a width partition. But that's your set maintenance tab. And then you can globally change the price of your finished goods. But again, that's not the best priority, because normally you're going to do a global price increase on the quote file, or in order entry, you're going to do a global price increase on the sales matrix file. So inventory it's not the best place to have your sales price coming from. It's better to use either the quote file or the price matrix. And I've already explained the classes. And the last is just inquiries and reporting, which are pretty self-explanatory. The only thing I do, just want to emphasize is all these reports, you can have the report writer, and then you can pick whatever field you want, pick the order of the fields, and then you can output to Excel, or you can output to a printer, to the screen, or wherever. And that is an overview for beginners. I kind of got a little more in depth than beginners, but that's what I do sometimes. So we're going to open the floor up to questions. I'm going to let Tony ask the questions that may have come in, and I'll try to answer them.
All right. Thank you, Joe. All right, so we've got a couple of questions in so far, so I do want to go through those. But while we're doing that, I'd like everyone to think about any questions that they have and go ahead and enter those in the chat box so we can make sure we get all of them answered. So the first question, Joe, is on the system defaults. Are defaults system-wide, or can individual users set their own defaults?
When you're talking about NK1 parameters, they are system-wide for the most part. When you're speaking about report parameters, or as an example, if I'm going to this, if I want to rearrange the columns here, and I want this, let's say I want to put the style over here closer. This is a user ID. This is by user ID. Files and reports are by user ID. But when you talk about how we're going to use the system, such as, I'll just go to some of these, FG item as an example. What is my FG item number? This is system-wide. Users cannot dictate this. You set this and it's company-wide. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. Next question. Could you please elaborate on counting finished goods using the barcoding system? Customers said they've had some problems with physical counting of inventory.
Well, physical count is really the same as doing it through our system here, whereby you're going to put an item in, but the only difference is when you're doing it through our barcoding system, you're going to have a tag number. So you're going to be scanning, in this case, this tag number right here. And then once you scan that tag number, it's going to transfer over what's on hand. Let me just, if I can quickly get rid of everything, I'll do one. So I'm just going to go add again. I'm going to type in this item. I'm going to go over to the tag number, and I'm just going to select one. And then I'm going to say import quantity on hand. And this is basically how the barcoding, you can do this manually, or the barcoding system will import all this data, and it'll basically prompt, it'll stop right here. And then you can either say, you can either save it, or you can update that field. And then again, it'll post immediately, or it'll just build a transaction file like I'm doing now. But the sharpshooter physically updates this same exact data, and it goes to the same history file. It's just a faster way of doing it because you're using barcoding. Okay? All right.
Okay, next question. Are you able to have both assembled and unassembled items in one set?
You can have sets within sets if that's what you're talking about. But basically, all the components are unassembled. But if you had, don't know, well, this might be a partition. But if I want, let's say I had a set item or a two-piece box. If I had a set within a set, I'd have to say over here, the set button, I have to say this is also a set. Okay? But in the set part screen, you could create, you could put unlimited number of sets in this file maintenance under the set maintenance. You could, so each set could be, one set could be unassembled, one set could be assembled. But basically then you're producing those sets individually. But the ultimate is the main item here, which is the parent set. It's either assembled or unassembled. So there's only one option. When you go to the finished goods file and you build an option, when you add an item, if it's the parent item, it's either assembled or unassembled. Actually, it would be on the next screen. So either assembled or unassembled. It can't be both. So any one item can only be one. Hopefully that answered the question.
Okay. So we're looking for some more questions. That was the last question I had so far. So if you have a question about finished good inventory, anything that Joe has mentioned, go ahead and please enter that down in the chat box so we can go over those.
One thing I did want to mention about, again, that counts. If you were to scan, let's say your operator moved a pallet from one location to another and didn't tell the system. If you were to scan or even do a physical count and you put in the correct location, the system would automatically zero out the previous location where it was originally received to. So our system is smart enough when you do when you say this item is here, it says, well, it used to be there, so I'm going to zero it out. So that's one other option I wanted to mention on cycle counts.
Very good. Okay, any other questions? We have a question. All right. This question says, we produce an IL8 report to compare inventory with the post-scan. After confirming the physical count, the system is still not equating.
I can't answer that question. I would have somebody from our support team would have to log in and see what's going on. But what I would say, with caution, when your inventory is accurate, and unfortunately a lot of clients do a lot of things incorrectly in the beginning, and then years later you can't just go ahead and run this report. But if you had a problem with one item, I would definitely say run this report right here, or this file cleanup NF10. That is going to rebuild your inventory in chronological order, meaning if you physically entered let's say a cycle count in the morning, but you had invoices that hadn't posted or bill of ladings that were sitting out there for that item, or even receipts, any transaction that was sitting out there that hadn't been posted, when you post that transaction, if it's posted before the cycle count, it's going to change your inventory. And then when you do the cycle count, it's going to overwrite that change. So this program will put everything in chronological order. In other words, it says, okay, I did a cycle count. It puts if you did a cycle count in the morning, but you didn't post it till the next day, then things could be out of whack. But this is going to look at the date of the cycle count as being in the morning, and then you did a shipment or a receipt in the afternoon, it's going to add or subtract accordingly. So this report or this utility, we have clients that run this every night. Some clients run it every week. But I'm just going to caution, if you've never run it and you've been manually updating your inventory, what this is going to do is going to show you all the problematic transactions you've been doing over the years. But once you fix them by putting cycle counts and getting it accurate, this report will always clean up your inventory. I should say this utility. So, but I can't answer why your inventory is out of whack without investigation.
Yeah. So that's good. It's an interesting utility there, Joe. Any other questions for Joe? If you would just enter those down in the chat box. Give it a couple minutes here. We are coming up on the hour, top of the hour, so we'll likely call it a day unless there's some additional questions. Any other questions for Joe? Okay. Well, it looks like that might be it, Joe. So I want to thank everybody for attending today. If you do have a question, of course, you can always email me, send it to me, even type it in the chat box. But we want to make sure we get all your questions answered. So be sure to send that, any feedback you have on any of the things. We'd love to hear that as well. So with that, we're going to call it a day, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Thank you.